All right, true believers, we are going to learn how to use Lightroom, just the very basics of Lightroom here today. Again, I'm no expert at this, but I have enough information here to kind of get you started. My recommendation would be to go online, hours and hours of tutorials out there. Just find some things that show you specific tips and tricks for each of the different modes and tools and all sorts of things in there. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our CR2 file, which is our RAW file, right? Depending on what camera type you took it with, it might be tagged something different, but we want to make sure we're using a RAW file. We're going to bring it down to Lightroom here. I'm going to drag it onto Lightroom. It's going to start it up. And then we are going to, sorry about that. We are going to import it. So the thing about what Lightroom wants to do is it actually wants to take ownership of your photographs. So instead of just sort of like in Photoshop where you find something on the desktop, you open it in Photoshop, you work on it, you save it onto Photoshop again, Lightroom wants to take ownership so that it can help you in your workflow. We're going to sort of, not necessarily bypass it, but we're going to still keep this thing on the desktop. So here, on the left-hand side, this is my source. So, you open this up, all these, subfolders here, all this stuff, you can look around and see there's folders. So like in my downloads folder and library show, there's some folders in here. This shows me all the pictures in my library show folders, right? Here I'm going to go to the desktop, which is this folder here. These are all the pictures on the desktop. I'm going to grab my monkey CR2, which is this guy right here. You can check others that you want to import here, right? Do multiples. And then over here on the right-hand side, this is where it's going to, the destination is going to go. And I'm going to say copy. Excuse me, because I like to make a copy of things. And then under here, there's an arrow that says destination. So in destination, it's just basically saying, here it wants to throw it into my pictures folder, which I don't want because it'll get lost. I'm just going to say desktop. And this is easiest for you as well because you're going to pull it off your desktop and put it into your Google Drive anyways. So I'm going to say desktop. So it's coming from the desktop. I've chosen the pictures I want to. I can look at the individual picture if I want to, or I can use the multiple view down here. And then finally, this is where it's going to end up. I clicked copy right here, and then I chose desktop as my destination. I'm going to say import. So there we go. And here it is, it's imported. All right, so these are my files here. So once I have every picture that I want in here, you don't need to do this every time. Once you import it, this is the thing about Lightroom, is that in Photoshop, every time you go to Photoshop, you have to open your file in Photoshop. In this one, just start up Lightroom, and if you've already imported it into this computer, it'll just be here, and you're going to start building this catalog or this library of pictures inside Lightroom. So just open Lightroom right up. All right, so when I'm in Lightroom, if I have multiple pictures, I might, but here, this is the only one I have in here so far, so this is the only one that's here. I'm going to click on Develop. All right, and just to make mention of all this other stuff, you can see here it says Map, it says Book, Slideshow, Print, Web. There's all these different things you can do with Lightroom, but we're just going to process our picture like we would sort of in Photoshop. So I'm going to select the picture I want to work on. I'm going to say Develop, and it's going to take me to this whole different area right here. So here's my picture. If I want to show this over here on the side, I can hide it with this little arrow down here at the bottom. If I don't need my film strip down here, I can hide that too and get a little bit more real estate to look at. And over here, these are my tools, obviously, but then I want those back because I want to work on my tools. All right, at the top, histogram, you can see here's my darks, here's my mediums, here's my highlights and my bright whites over here. These are some different tools that I'm going to show you guys really quickly. And then down here, underneath these arrows, there's all these different adjustments that you can make to your picture. And again, there's no way I'm going to go through all these, but you can look online to tutorials, just look up the single words. There's all sorts of different things to work on these. We are going to focus on basic, right? And under basic, you can see there's temperature, tint, which is the white balance. There is the tone, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, and then presence, which is your saturation, your clarity, and your vibrance, and all that good stuff down here. All right, so first of all, white balance. This picture is pretty well white balanced because we had control of the light. Sometimes you're going to see your picture and it's going to look like this when you do the tungsten lights or like a portrait or something. So all you're going to do is adjust the temperature, right? Warmer, cooler, warmer, cooler. So you can do this by hand. You can just slide it over and see what you get. And you can see how your histogram up here changes real time, which is totally cool, right? Then down here is a tint. This just changes the overall tint of your picture as well. If I don't like what that looks like, if I double click on the word tint, it takes it back to 0. If I go to temperature, it also takes it back to its original temperature. I can try one of these custom ones here, right, and see how it changes my image. All right, there's auto, or I can just add shot. Or if you have a picture that is sort of like this, right, I can also use this eyedropper. So I click on the eyedropper, I bring it over here, and I'm looking for, I know this is blue, but I'm looking for something sort of a neutrally gray color. And I'm going to click on this. And look at that. It clears it all up and it gives me the right color balance. So again, there's a whole tutorial for that. I would say maybe the eyedropper to the medium gray is maybe the best way to go. But, again, look online. All right, so that's the first one. So down here, exposure, obviously, as you would expect, turns exposure up and down. Look at my histogram at the top there, changing everything to black, middle grays, everything to light. So maybe I'll keep it sort of where it was. I don't know if I really need a whole lot of exposure changing on that. Contrast, watch my histogram here, pushes everything into the middle, or here it brings everything to the outside where it brings everything to black and white, right? So again, just a little bit of contrast in here, but not a whole lot. But let's just go crazy. So I'm going to go this, I'm going to go down here, I'm going to try, here's highlights, shadows, I'm going to try all this stuff, and I just totally screw up my picture. So the cool thing about this is down here at the bottom, there's a reset button, and I can say reset, and it resets the whole thing back to 0. All right, so I'm going to go back to my white balance, change that up. I'm going to change my exposure again just a little bit. I'm going to adjust my contrast a little bit too. All right, if I want to do something again like the highlights, like if I do something and it screws up the highlights, let's do blacks here, like this. If I double click on the word blacks, that just fixes that individual slider. All right, so contrast and exposure, we saw those. Highlights, this is just going to brighten or darken your highlighted area so you can see the background sort of changes a little bit, pushing everything towards white a little bit. My shadows, this is great for brightening up shadows. It also will darken your shadows a little bit if they're not quite dark enough. You just want to be careful that you're not darkening the whole thing here. My white levels, it brings the whites up. You can see that, again, that histogram sliding over there. You just want to be careful it doesn't break too far. And then the black level, it's going to bring up blacks, or it's going to eliminate blacks in your picture. Now, another secret for Lightroom is that your option key is king, right? If you hold down the option key, you can even see the words changing here, set to default, like all sorts of stuff. It does all sorts of changes. So whenever you slide a slider, sometimes what I do just for the heck of it is I will hold down the option key just to see if it makes any differences. Now, when you slide the black and white slider right now, like this one, you just see the white levels happen. If I hold down the Alt key when I do this, this shows me right where that white point breaks, right? So here, anything in that white and that blue, that is like super white, and we don't like that. So I'm going to come back this way, and I'm going to bring it so the white just appears right there, and maybe even a little bit less. And then for the black level, I'm going to do the same. When I pull this to the right, I see white. When I go to the left, I start to see the blacks appear. So any of that color, that's where that black is going to be. So I'm going to do it so I don't want to do it too far. I'm just going to do it like this so I see a little bit of that black in there. Now, the last thing for like sort of comparing and contrasting is the backslash key below your delete key on the keyboard. If I click that, this is before and this is after. So you can see already I've made huge improvements to that picture, right? It looked pretty good before, but I've made that picture a lot richer. Finally, clarity. I can adjust clarity over the whole thing, and basically what this is going to do is it is going to increase or decrease, sort of like our high pass filter. And then below here with vibrance, this is going to adjust the mid-range color. So look at all that color sort of comes up here. And then saturation just saturates all the color from top to bottom. All right, just like so. All right, and again, I'm going to undo my vibrance. I'm going to undo saturation. I'm going to undo clarity and leave those guys all alone. All right, so that's sort of like the basics of what you're doing to sort of improve your picture. I'm going to reset it to 0. Now, the other thing I can do is if I don't want to just do basics like this, because what that does is it does this control over the entire picture, right? But here what I want to do is I want to do just designated areas, right? So one thing I can do is if I just want to bring up the purples, right, I can come down here to HSL. All right, HSL is hue, saturation, and luminance. So I can click on hue. That's just going to change the individual colors a little bit. So if I have my purples, I can make my purples a little bit more magenta. I can make them a little bit more purpley. If I have my reds, I can make them a little more pastel-y to pink, and so on. Saturation is just going to bring up the color. So like my purple, the brown looks okay, but the purple looks a little bit dull. So I'm going to go to purple, and I'm going to bring this up. Look at that. If I go all the way to the top, it's way too much. But I'm just going to bring up that purple just a little bit in that area right there, right? And then maybe my yellow is a little too bright. So I'm going to go to my yellow. If I go too far, it turns gray. But I'm just going to just -6 that saturation just a little bit. All right, and then luminance is the brightness of your color. So luminance with the purples, I can make it more like a white purple, or like a black purple. You can sort of think about that way. It's basically just letting more light in. So if this is too dry and too white, I can come back here and just sort of bring some of that deeper tone back in that way. All right, so that's looking pretty good so far. Then under here I have detail. Detail is great for the amount of sharpening. So let me zoom in. If I go Command plus, I can zoom in a little bit here. My space bar allows me to move this picture around a little. All right, so here I'm going to do the amount. So I'm going to bring this way up to the top, and look at that. Look at the button, like it gets all gritty here and everything. And if I come back to 0, it makes it a little bit softer, right? So if I come up here, and then masking, what masking does is right now when I do this sharpening, it's going to affect pretty much everything here. So I can see the texture of the lips down here and that. If I bring the mask up a little bit, what it's going to do is it's going to let it be softer in some areas and harder in other areas. And the way I can see that is, again, if I hold down my friend the Option key and I click on this, if I hold it down, everything that's white here is being affected by it. And as I slide this to the right, anywhere that's in black is going to be affected less by the amount, right? So only those white areas. And then I'm going to bring the amount down because it's sort of a crazy amount there. All right. And then we have radius, which you can see here it's sharpening it up a little bit. Here it's softer. It's increasing that sharpness in here. If I bring this, hold on my Option key again when I'm doing radius, you can see this is like our high pass filter. So the more detail I have here, the less detail, the less harsh that is. And then again, detail is that same thing here where I can see in black and white. It's sort of softening it and it's sharpening it. You know, and again, these are like super fine controls. Noise reduction, you can reduce some of the noise. There's almost no noise in this picture, which is nice, but if you're using a high ISO, you might get some noise in your picture. There's some other things down here. Maybe in lens correction. Well, let's not even get to that. Let's not worry about that. All right, I think that's probably enough. So these are just some basic ones in here. Split toning, without too much explanation about what it does, you can add 2 different colors to your picture and do some of that, like the gradient mapping that we did, right? As you're changing it's gray. I'm going to change it to like this pink color here. I'm going to change this to green. So this is like that cross-processing sort of thing. You can change that color a little bit once you get a color in there. And then you can turn on the saturation of that a little bit. Here's my hue and here's my saturation. And it sort of adds that, here's before, here's after. It sort of makes it look like a Polaroid, again, a cross-process sort of a thing that way. All right, so I got that. We got a color. Tone curve is basically working with your lights and darks and shadows. Again, it's another way to get very specific about how to adjust the contrast levels in just specific areas of your picture. You can try to mess around with those. Some people go right to the curve here instead of using the sliders. Again, that's a whole nother tutorial. We just want to really focus on the basic stuff here. You can do color, you can do black and white, and you can change things for black and white to take a look at it. Black and white is pretty nice for that tone curve. Works pretty well. Again, I can go back. If I want to go back and reset the whole darn thing. All right, so that's great. But now if I want to do some specific work here, so let's say maybe I just want to highlight this monkey's face here. If I grab this tool right here, I click on it. And all it's doing is it's taking the basic and it's shoving it down to the bottom here, and it's opening up another window on the top. I have this brush that I can use, and this brush basically has the same effects that these have, but the difference is that it only adjusts the area that I'm painting, right? So here down at the bottom it says brush A, B, or erase. I'm going to go brush A for now, like a preset. This is the size of my brush. You see the way the brush is getting larger or smaller, right? I can also use the brackets like I would in Photoshop. Feather is the amount of hardness. So you can see here, this is the radius. Right here, it's a hard circle. This is a radius of feather that's happening here. And then flow will allow me to change how the density of that effect that's happening. Low flow is very light. Heavy flow is like 100%. It's showing up. So I'm going to turn my flow down to like 25%. All right. There's the density of the mask, which we're not going to worry about too much right now. That has to do also with the flow, and then we just need to know that there's this A and erase here. All right, so when I do this, I'm just going to go crazy. I'm going to bring my exposure all the way to the top, and I'm going to paint the face. All right, my flow is pretty light. See, as I paint that face area is becoming super light, right? So I can see if I mouse over it, the orange is just the mask. It's showing me what's masked right now, but then that's the effect of it. And then you can see this little pin here. That's a pin for that brush. So everywhere that I paint is attached to that pin, right? And then if I paint it over here, like this, so let me mouse over this for a second. So there we go. So all that stuff is that layer mask that's on there. Now, if I wanted to lighten that, but I wanted to do something different, like I want to desaturate this area over here, I'm going to come over here and say New Brush, right? I'm going to turn my saturation, where are you? Here you go. My saturation is all the way down, and I'm desaturating this area here. But the cool thing about this is if I was like, oh, maybe I want that to be super saturated, I can slide the slider, and it's super saturating that area. And I'm going to turn the exposure down on this, and it's only exposing that one particular piece on that, right? So in real time, I can make a change to that pin, but that's only happening to this pin. So I can go back to this pin and highlight this one, and I can say, all right, that was a little crazy. I'm going to go contrasty here a little bit more. I'm going to go the shadows. I'm going to turn the shadows down. I'm going to do the white level in here. All right, you see I'm sort of ruining the picture, but I'm sort of doing it on purpose. So then I can go back to this one. I can change this point. I can move this mask around a little bit too, which is totally cool, right? Again, I go to New Brush. I come up here. I paint this out like so. All right, so now I have 3 brushes up here. But I don't like that, or like this one's all crazy over here. Let's get rid of this one. I can click on it, and I hit the delete key on my keyboard. It makes that guy disappear. Now I can also use my erasing brush. So like in this hat, like let's say, let me go to this pin, and I'm going to brighten this hat up. But I just want the background to be bright, but I don't want the hat to be bright. I can go to my erasing brush. I can make my brush smaller down here with size, or I'm going to go on the fly. I'm going to use my bracket tool. I'm going to turn down the feather of this a little bit because I want that line to be a little sharper. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Bring it down here. So, and then I'm going to erase my layer mask. So this is sort of slow because my flow here, I'm going to bring up the flow here. All right, and what I'm doing is this is like we have to think about layer masking in Photoshop that we've done before. And I'm doing this way too fast. It's so messy. But I'm just erasing the layer mask, right? So when I come back here to this layer mask, you can see the way it's sort of emptied that layer mask right out of that area. All right, so there we go. So I'm going to, you can do this to your heart's content. Again, you can keep sliding these sliders. You do all this stuff. It's going to change this stuff real time. You can spend hours and hours in here. But I'm going to click on this. I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to click on this guy. I'm going to hit delete. Well, it looks really dark without all that craziness on there. So I'm going to go to my basics. I'm going to close that tool. I just clicked on the tool again to put it away. I'm going to open basic, and I'm going to bring up the exposure. Oops. Not too much. And I'm holding on my option key, and I can see here where it sort of breaks. So, that's probably it. Where's my whites here? Here, let's bring down my highlights. Bring the black level up a little bit. Let's bring this down a little bit. All right, it needs a little bit more. Down here is a little bit bright, but it's fine. It'll do okay. Then the last thing I'm going to show you in here, if you want to do this, is you can click on this window here. This is your cropping tool. Right now it's original size. I'm going to say, you can do 8.5 by 11, all this stuff. I'm going to say enter custom, and I'm going to say 8 by 10 inches, like so, and I'm going to say OK. And then in here, I'm just going to move this just like in Photoshop. I'm going to wiggle this monkey around here. I can bring this line in here a little bit. All right, I'm not going to worry about the resolution yet. I'm just worrying about where the monkey is here. And I am going to hit the return key on my keyboard, and now I've just cropped it to 8 by 10. I'm going to go back to my split toning for a second. That colors drive me crazy just a little bit. I'm going to turn down this balance here. Right, this is so I have more green or more yellow. I'm going to turn this down so it's a little bit more reddish, and then I'm going to bring the saturation down of these guys just a little bit more too. So they just feel a little oversaturated. There we go. And then I'm going to go back up to my exposure. This is a cool thing about this, again, is you can just sort of keep going back and forth into this guy here. All right, so that's about it, right? Your picture's all set to go. You're ready to roll here. So now what I want to do is I want to get this picture out of here, because like I said, if you just go to your library, you don't have to save this. There's no saving in Lightroom. It's just remembering this picture. So I can see here I have the cropping on it, and I have my color adjustments on it here. So if I just click on that, here's my color adjustments. It's going to take me out. If I go to my library, if I click on my cropping tool, it takes me right to my cropping tool, and I can come in here and I can mess around with that too. But the Lightroom is going to remember it. And that's why it's different than Photoshop. And that's why it wants to, like I said, it wants to import your files and sort of take control of them. But now let's get this thing out of here so we can actually save it to an assignment, or I can bring it in Photoshop and do some more things on it. I can put some text on it. I can do whatever I want to do. All right, so there's a gazillion ways to do this as well. What you can do is in Develop, I can just right-click on the picture itself, and I can go to Export. I can also bring up down here at the bottom, I can right-click on this, and I can say Export, and I can come down here. I can go back to my library, and I can go this way. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. Oops. Shoot, sorry. So then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click on it here. I'm going to say Export. Where'd you go? Here's Export. And I'm going to say Export here at the top. Now, in Export, of course, it wouldn't be an Adobe product if there weren't 1,000 different menus here. I'm going to close all these so we're not too confused. All right. Again, there's all sorts of different stuff in here. You can see it's just crazy town. Export location is one we want to do. Export to desktop, specific folder, wherever it is that you want to hunt, that's where it's going to be sent to. If you want to make a subfolder, it'll automatically make a subfolder and you can call it something. I'm just going to put it right on the desktop so I don't have to search for it. File naming, I'm just going to leave it the same name that it was when it came in. You can rename it if you want to, but again, I'm not going to worry about that. Video, I'm not going to worry about. File settings, this is another important one. What do you want it to be? We're going to say JPEG. All right, you can change it to a different, you can do it to a PSD if you want to do a Photoshop document, but we're going to say JPEG. Quality starts at 60. I'm going to, these are going to be pretty small files, so I'm going to put it up to 100% right now. Obviously, if you were doing this for just like a Facebook picture or something, you might bring that quality down a little bit and save the file size, but I'm going to say 100%. And then image sizing is the last thing we're going to do here. And I'm going to say resize because I want to change it. I am going to go to dimensions, and then I'm going to say 8 by 10 because that's what my picture is here. And then I'm going to say resolution, you guessed it, 150. So that's my basic, right? And then I'm going to say export. So off it goes. Export my one file. I minimize this window. Here's my CR2 that I originated here. And then, oh, there it is right here. It's taking a second to draw it. Sorry, it's still exporting, I think. I'm doing this on my laptop. It's a little bit slower. No, that's it. That's weird. Hang on. Let's see what happened. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to here. I'm going to say export. Export. Let's check our settings here. To desk, ask what to do. JPEG quality 100%. Oh, right here. I didn't change this. See, haste makes waste. Pixels. So it was 8 pixels by 18 pixels. I want to do inches. There you go. So see, that was only 0.053 inches by 0.06. So let's go 8 by 10 inches. Good. So problem solving, right? I'm going to say export. It's going to export. I think it's going to ask me to copy over because I didn't change the name. There we go. Oh, I threw it away, so it's not going to be out there. So now let me minimize this. Here we go. This is the JPEG. So this is the guy that we just did. So this, if I bring this into Photoshop, this one is going to be my fixed one. This one is going to be 8 by 10 by 150. And then it's going to be more like 5 megabytes instead of 50 megabytes. Let's see. Come on, little Photoshop. There we go. So if I say image, image size, there it is, 8 by 10 by 150. So there you go. That's all there is to it. Again, those are very basic controls, but feel free to look online, look for tutorials, look for specific things, search a specific tool in Lightroom. That's probably the best way to do it and not get overwhelmed, is just to sort of learn one tool at a time and find your way through. All right, thanks for watching.